The Boeing 787 Dreamliner cruised at 37,000 feet above the Pacific, its passengers lost in their private bubbles of champagne and Netflix streams. In Seat 9C, Venetia Blackwood adjusted her Hermes scarf and glanced at her phone for the 100th time. The portfolio updates could wait. Her hedge fund had closed another record quarter, and at 29, she was already worth more than most small nations' GDP. The manicured nails that had signed billion-dollar deals now traced lazy patterns on the leather armrest as she watched clouds drift past the oval window. She'd built her empire on calculated risks and ice-cold precision, transforming her grandfather's modest aviation company into a financial juggernaut that owned everything from cargo fleets to military contractors. Yet sitting in first class, surrounded by the quiet hum of wealth and privilege, she felt hollow. The champagne tasted flat. The cashmere felt scratchy. Even the view from her corner office in Manhattan had become just another backdrop for conference calls. The flight attendant approached with practiced grace. "Ms. Blackwood, would you care for anything else before we begin our descent into?" The cabin lights flickered, once, twice. Then the intercom crackled to life with a voice that carried authority and barely controlled tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We're experiencing some technical difficulties. I need all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened." Venetia's trained eye caught what others missed, the slight tremor in the captain's voice, the way he'd paused before technical difficulties. She'd heard that exact tone before, in briefing rooms where men with stars on their shoulders delivered news that would never make the evening reports. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her head of security. "Mayday signal intercepted. Hostile aircraft inbound. Your location compromised." The blood drained from her face as reality crystallized. This wasn't turbulence or engine trouble. Someone had found her. After 5 years of carefully constructed anonymity, her past had caught up at 37,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. The intercom crackled again. This time, Captain Morrison's voice carried the weight of desperation. "If there are any military pilots aboard this aircraft, please identify yourself immediately to the nearest flight attendant. We have an emergency situation that requires immediate assistance." Venetia closed her eyes and felt the familiar weight of dog tags she no longer wore, felt phantom straps from a flight suit she'd hung up years ago. Around her, passengers whispered nervously, checking phones that showed no signal. None of them knew that the woman in Hermes and diamonds had once been Major V. Blackwood, call sign Reaper, the youngest pilot ever to earn her wings in the elite 355th Fighter Squadron. The woman who'd walked away from everything after one mission went terribly wrong. Now, staring at the endless blue horizon, she realized the sky had found her again. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin once more, urgent and pleading, as if the very air itself was calling her back to a life she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. Captain Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the radio, his 23 years of commercial aviation experience suddenly feeling inadequate for what was unfolding outside his cockpit windows. Through the reinforced glass, 3 dark silhouettes maintained formation off their starboard wing, sleek fighter jets bearing no identifying marks, their weapons systems clearly visible beneath swept-back wings. "This is Singapore Airlines Flight 447, he transmitted on the emergency frequency. "We are a civilian aircraft carrying 312 passengers. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came in accented English, cold and mechanical. "Singapore 447, you are carrying a high-value target. Alter course to heading 090 immediately or we will be forced to take action." Morrison's co-pilot, Alina Vasquez, checked their instruments with practiced efficiency. "Fuel's good for another 4 hours, Skip, but those aren't showing up on any civilian radar, military-grade stealth modifications." The passengers remained oblivious to the deadly dance occurring outside. Flight attendant Jessica Kim moved through the aisles with forced calm, her trained smile masking the terror that Morrison's private briefing had instilled. She'd worked international routes for 12 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. In the first-class cabin, she approached the woman in 9C with careful steps. The passenger list had identified her as V. Blackwood, but Jessica noticed details that didn't match the typical tech executive or oil heiress. The way her eyes constantly swept the cabin, cataloging exits and potential threats. The subtle callus on her right index finger that suggested extensive trigger discipline. Most tellingly, her complete lack of panic when Captain Morrison's announcement echoed through the cabin. "Ma'am," Jessica whispered, leaning close, "the captain received your message through the flight manifest system. Do you have military experience?" Venetia looked up, and for just a moment, Jessica saw something dangerous flicker behind those calculating eyes. Something predatory and precise that transformed the billionaire socialite into someone else entirely. "What kind of aircraft are tracking us?" Venetia's voice carried an authority that made Jessica instinctively straighten. "The captain says 3 fighters, unknown origin. They're demanding we alter course." Through the small window, Venetia caught a glimpse of dark metal cutting through cumulus clouds. Her trained eye immediately identified the swept wings and twin engines of modified F-16 Fighting Falcons, but the lack of national markings told a different story. These weren't military pilots following rules of engagement. These were mercenaries or private military contractors operating outside international law. "Tell Captain Morrison that Major Victoria Blackwood is aboard," she said quietly, using her full name and rank for the first time in years. "Former 355th Fighter Squadron. I need to speak with him immediately." Jessica's eyes widened. "You're a fighter pilot." "Was," Venetia corrected, but her fingers unconsciously moved to where her wings insignia used to rest. "Tell him my call sign was Reaper. He'll understand what that means." As Jessica hurried toward the cockpit, Venetia closed her eyes and let muscle memory take over. Her hands moved through phantom pre-flight checks, her breathing automatically adjusted to combat rhythms she'd thought were buried forever. Outside, the hostile aircraft maintained their threatening formation, unaware that their target had just transformed from helpless billionaire to something far more dangerous. The sky was calling her home. Captain Morrison's expression shifted from skeptical to stunned as Jessica relayed the passenger's credentials. He'd heard whispers about Reaper during his brief Air Force stint decades ago, stories that sounded like legend, until you met someone who'd served alongside the pilots of the 355th, the squadron that handled missions so classified they didn't officially exist. "Bring her up," he ordered, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Alina, maintain current heading and altitude. Don't give them any reason to think we're complying or resisting." Minutes later, Venetia stepped into the cockpit, and Morrison immediately understood why the stories about Reaper had spread through military aviation circles like wildfire. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent thousands of hours in high-stress environments, her eyes instantly cataloging every instrument, every warning light, every tactical consideration. "Status report," she said, sliding into the jump seat with unconscious familiarity. 3 bogies, modified F-16s, probably Block 52 plus variants with aftermarket stealth packages, Morrison replied. "No national markings, armed with what appears to be AIM-120 AMRAAMs and possibly air-to-surface missiles." Venetia nodded, her gaze fixed on the threatening silhouettes visible through the cockpit windows. They're maintaining combat spread formation, roughly 800 meters separation. Professional positioning, but they're showing heat signatures through my thermal app. She held up her phone, its military-grade application still active from her contractor consulting work. Pilots are running hot engines, suggesting they're prepared for extended engagement. "Can a 787 outmaneuver fighters?" Alina asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Not in a traditional sense, Venetia replied, but we have advantages they might not expect. Our fuel capacity, passenger weight distribution, and the fact that they need us alive. She paused, studying the instrument panel. What's our cargo manifest? Morrison pulled up the digital manifest on his tablet. Standard passenger luggage, some electronic shipments to Tokyo, and, he frowned, one sealed container marked as diplomatic freight, required special handling authorization. That's what they're after, Venetia said grimly. Someone loaded something onto this plane that people are willing to commit air piracy to obtain. The radio crackled again. Singapore 447, you have 30 seconds to comply with course correction to heading 090. This is your final warning. Venetia's mind raced through possibilities, calculating odds with the cold precision that had made her legendary among her former squadron mates. The 787's maximum altitude was 43,000 feet, too low to escape modern fighters. Its maximum speed was roughly Mach 0.85, laughably slow compared to supersonic interceptors. But commercial aircraft had one advantage that military jets often overlooked: unpredictability. Captain, how much fuel do we have for emergency maneuvers? Enough for maybe 20 minutes of aggressive flying, before we compromise our ability to reach an alternate landing site. That's 19 minutes longer than we'll have if we comply with their demands, Venetia said. Trust me, Captain. I've been on both sides of this scenario. Through the cockpit windows, the lead fighter moved closer, its pilot clearly visible in the bubble canopy. Venetia could see him pointing toward their aircraft, probably communicating with his wingmen about optimal attack positions. 20 seconds, Singapore 447. Morrison looked at Venetia, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him why certain pilots became legends. What do you need me to do, Major? For the first time in 5 years, Venetia Blackwood smiled with genuine anticipation. The transformation was remarkable to witness. Gone was the polished billionaire with manicured nails and designer accessories. In her place sat a predator who'd spent years hunting other predators across hostile skis, someone who'd earned her call sign by making the impossible look routine. First, we need to understand their psychology, Venetia said, her voice dropping to the clinical tone that had once briefed fighter squadrons before dawn raids. These aren't military pilots following rules of engagement. They're contractors, which means they're operating under different risk assessments. They need whatever's in our diplomatic cargo more than they need to avoid international incidents. Morrison's hands hovered over the controls as the 30-second deadline approached, so they won't actually shoot us down. They'll absolutely shoot us down if they think we're escaping with their prize, Venetia corrected. But they'll try less lethal options first. Expect them to target our engines, maybe try to force us down on a remote airfield where they can extract what they want without witnesses. Alina monitored the radar screen, watching the 3 blips maintain their threatening formation. They're spreading out, creating a containment pattern. Standard intercept doctrine, Venetia nodded. Lead aircraft maintains communication and visual contact, wingmen position for crossfire angles. But here's what they don't know. The 787's flight envelope includes some very interesting capabilities that Boeing doesn't advertise to commercial operators. The radio erupted with hostile voices. Singapore 447, you are in violation of our direct orders. Begin immediate descent to flight level 200 and adjust heading to 090. Captain, how familiar are you with your aircraft's maximum performance specifications? Venetia asked. Morrison's military background kicked in. I know the published limits, but I suspect you're talking about something else. The 787 was designed with anti-terrorism modifications that most pilots never learn about. Emergency evasion protocols, enhanced structural tolerances, and something called rapid descent capability that can drop this bird like a stone while maintaining control authority. Through the window, the lead fighter had moved close enough that they could see the pilot's helmet and oxygen mask. His aircraft bristled with weapons that could reduce their airliner to debris in seconds. Yet Venetia studied him with the detached curiosity of a chess grandmaster, evaluating her opponent's position. "He's flying too close," she observed. "Professional pilots maintain safer separation distances. This guy's showing off, which means he's either inexperienced or overconfident. Both are advantages we can exploit." The intercom crackled as Morrison activated the passenger address system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some air traffic control complications that may require some unusual maneuvers. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and remain seated." Venetia appreciated his calm understatement. Panic among 300 passengers would only complicate their already desperate situation. "Elena, I need you to monitor our structural stress indicators very carefully," Venetia continued. "What I'm about to ask Captain Morrison to do will push this aircraft beyond its normal operational envelope." The lead fighter moved even closer, its pilot probably trying to establish visual communication or intimidate their civilian crew. What he couldn't know was that he just positioned himself exactly where Major Victoria Blackwood wanted him. "Tell me you have a plan, Major," Morrison said. Venetia's smile carried the cold confidence of someone who'd once turned 16 kills into legend. "Oh, Captain, I have something much better than a plan. I have a reputation." The next 60 seconds would determine whether that reputation had been earned or inherited, whether the legend of Reaper could translate from fighter cockpit to commercial airliner, and whether 300 innocent passengers would live to see another sunset. But first, they needed to remind these mercenaries that the sky belonged to those who understood its secrets, not those who simply possessed the weapons to threaten it. The moment of truth arrived with mechanical precision. Venetia's fingers moved across the instrument panel with muscle memory that transcended the 5-year gap since her last combat mission, her mind automatically calculating angles, velocities, and probabilities with the supernatural instinct that had made her untouchable in the skies above Afghanistan. "Captain, on my mark, I need you to initiate emergency descent protocol, but not the standard procedure. We're going to drop like we've suffered catastrophic decompression, which means nose-down attitude, maximum descent rate, and complete radio silence." Morrison's knuckles whitened on the controls. "That's going to terrify the passengers." "Terrified passengers are better than dead passengers," Venetia replied coldly. "Elena, kill all exterior lights and transponder. Make us disappear from their instruments for as long as possible." The lead fighter maintained its threatening position, so close that they could see the pilot's face behind his visor. His wingmen held formation at optimal firing positions, their missile guidance systems probably painting the airliner with targeting lasers. "Why haven't they fired warning shots?" Elena asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Because warning shots leave evidence," Venetia explained. "These contractors need this to look like an accident or mechanical failure. International investigators finding evidence of hostile fire would create diplomatic incidents that their employers can't afford." Through her phone's encrypted communication app, she sent a rapid series of messages to contacts whose names would never appear on any official roster, people who'd learned to trust Reaper's judgment in situations where seconds determined survival. The response came back within 20 seconds. "Reaper, this is Ghostwriter. We have eyes on your situation. 3 unknown aircraft, no transponder signatures, no flight plan filed with any regional air traffic control. You're dealing with black ops contractors, probably linked to the Marrakesh incident last month." Venetia's blood ran cold. The Marrakesh incident had involved the theft of classified aerospace technology from a weapons contractor, technology that her own investment firm had unknowingly helped finance through a series of shell companies and subsidiary acquisitions. "They're not just after the diplomatic cargo," she realized aloud. "They're after me." Someone discovered that Venetia Blackwood and Major Victoria Blackwood are the same person. Morrison and Alina exchanged glances that spoke volumes about how their routine flight to Tokyo had transformed into something resembling a Jason Bourne movie. "So what's the play, Major?" Morrison asked. Venetia closed her eyes and let her tactical instincts take complete control, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once made her squadron the most feared unit in 3 theaters of operations. Her breathing slowed, her pulse steadied, and when she opened her eyes again, Captain Morrison saw the predator that her call sign had been designed to honor. "We're going to do something that violates every rule of commercial aviation," she said quietly. "We're going to fight back." The lead fighter pilot made his first mistake by moving even closer, probably trying to establish visual contact with their cockpit crew. What he couldn't anticipate was that he just positioned himself in the perfect location for Venetia's plan. "Mark," she said. Morrison pushed the controls forward with decisive authority, and Singapore Airlines Flight 447 dropped out of the sky like a stone. The transformation from routine commercial flight to high-stakes aerial combat occurred in seconds that felt like hours. As the Boeing 787 entered its emergency descent, Venetia watched through the cockpit windows as the 3 hostile fighters reacted with confusion to their target's sudden disappearance from formation level. "Descent rate 8,000 feet per minute," Alina called out, her voice professionally calm despite the circumstances. "Structural integrity holding, but we're approaching maximum tolerance for this airframe." The passenger cabin erupted in controlled chaos as 300 people experienced the terrifying sensation of apparent free fall. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, their emergency training taking over as they secured loose items and reassured panicked travelers that the pilots remained in control. Venetia monitored their altitude through her phone's aviation apps, watching their position relative to the fighters who were now scrambling to re-establish contact. "They're diving to intercept, but their descent rate is limited by fuel consumption calculations. Fighter pilots always have to balance aggression with range requirements." Through the chaos, she maintained communication with her encrypted network. Ghostwriter's updates appeared on her screen in real time. "Reaper, satellite surveillance shows your bogies are burning through fuel reserves attempting to match your descent profile. Estimate 15 minutes before they hit bingo fuel and need to break off engagement." "15 minutes is too long," Venetia muttered, calculating passenger tolerance for emergency maneuvers against the psychological pressure that 300 civilians could endure. Morrison fought to maintain control as the aircraft bucked and shuddered through its punishing descent. "Major, we need to level off soon or we'll have structural failure." "Not yet," Venetia replied, her eyes fixed on the altimeter. "We're going to use their overconfidence against them. These contractors think they're hunting a helpless commercial flight, but what they've actually found is a weapons platform that's been disguised as civilian transportation." Alina shot her a confused look. "A weapons platform?" "Every commercial airliner is a potential kinetic weapon," Venetia explained with cold precision. 800,000 pounds of aircraft moving at 500 knots contains more destructive energy than most conventional explosives. The trick is learning how to deploy that energy tactically. The lead fighter appeared in their field of vision, diving hard to re-establish visual contact. His pilot was clearly struggling with the unexpected maneuver, probably radioing his wingmen for guidance on how to handle a target that refused to behave like typical civilian prey. "Captain, level off at flight level 150 and prepare for evasive maneuvers," Venetia ordered. "We're going to show these amateurs the difference between military pilots and private contractors." Morrison pulled back on the controls, and the massive aircraft began to level out of its emergency dive. The sensation of returning to normal flight characteristics brought visible relief to passengers who had spent the last 3 minutes convinced they were experiencing mechanical failure. But in the cockpit, the real battle was just beginning. Through her encrypted communications, Venetia was coordinating with assets that technically didn't exist, calling in favors from people whose names appeared on no official rosters, activating networks that had been built during years of classified operations in disputed airspace. Ghostwriter, this is Reaper. I need immediate support at coordinates. She rattled off their position with military precision. 3 hostile aircraft, unknown operators, probably linked to Marrakesh. Authorization code Tango 77 Alpha. The response came back within seconds. Reaper, Tango 77 Alpha confirmed. You have assets moving to your position, ETA 12 minutes. Can you maintain evasion until support arrives? Venetia looked at Morrison and Alina, seeing in their faces the same mixture of fear and determination that she'd witnessed in combat pilots facing impossible odds. We'll make it work, she said simply. Because failure wasn't an option when 300 innocent lives hung in the balance. The hostile fighters had reorganized into attack formation, their pilots clearly frustrated by their target's refusal to behave like helpless civilian prey. Through the cockpit windows, Venetia could see the lead aircraft positioning for what appeared to be a warning burst across their flight path, a standard intimidation technique designed to force compliance without leaving evidence of direct assault. They're moving to weapons release position, she observed with clinical detachment. Captain, when I give the word, I need you to execute a hard right bank, maximum G-force tolerance for this airframe. Morrison's military training kicked in automatically. Understood, Major. Alina, secure everything that can move. This is going to get rough. The passenger address system crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to experience some additional turbulence. Please ensure seatbelts remain fastened and follow all flight attendant instructions. Through her encrypted communication system, Venetia maintained contact with assets that were converging on their position from directions the hostile fighters couldn't anticipate. The network she'd built during her years of classified operations was proving its worth in ways she'd never imagined when she walked away from military service. Ghostwriter, I need tactical assessment on those F-16 modifications. She transmitted using voice-to-text encryption that would appear as routine data packets to electronic surveillance. The response came back with intelligence-grade precision. Reaper, analysis of satellite imagery suggests Block 52 plus airframes with aftermarket radar signature reduction, extended fuel tanks, and what appears to be electronic warfare countermeasures. Professional modification work, probably Emirati or Israeli contractors. That information changed everything. Venetia had fought alongside Emirati pilots during joint operations, and their tactical doctrine emphasized precision strikes with minimal collateral damage. If these were Gulf region contractors, they would avoid actions that could be traced back to their government sponsors. They won't risk shooting us down over international waters, she concluded aloud. Too much diplomatic exposure if investigators find evidence linking the attack to regional military contractors. Alina monitored their radar signature as the fighters maneuvered into increasingly aggressive positions. So what's their endgame? They can't force us to land without destination airports, and they can't attack without creating evidence. They're going to try to disable us, Venetia realized. Target our engines or control surfaces, force an emergency landing where they can extract what they want and eliminate witnesses away from international observers. The lead fighter moved into firing position, its pilot clearly preparing to demonstrate his serious intent. Venetia watched his approach angle with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent years studying how to kill aircraft just like the one she now found herself defending. "Mark," she said quietly. Morrison threw the Boeing 787 into a banking turn that pushed both aircraft and passengers to their structural limits, the massive airliner responding with surprising agility to controls that had been designed for comfort rather than combat maneuvers. The fighter pilot, clearly not expecting such aggressive evasion from a commercial aircraft, overshot his firing solution and was forced to abort his attack run. His wingmen scrambled to adjust their positions, but Venetia had already calculated their next moves with the supernatural intuition that had made her untouchable in hostile skis. 8 minutes until support arrives, she announced, checking her encrypted communications. We just need to stay alive until then. Through the cockpit windows, she could see her opponents regrouping for another attempt, their formation tighter and more professional than before. These pilots were learning that their target was far more dangerous than intelligence reports had suggested. But Venetia Blackwood had spent years perfecting the art of making dangerous look effortless. And Major Victoria Blackwood had never lost a dogfight. The deadly dance at 30,000 feet intensified as both sides adapted to unexpected circumstances. The hostile fighters had abandoned subtle intimidation in favor of increasingly aggressive positioning, their pilots clearly under pressure to complete their mission before fuel limitations forced them to withdraw. Venetia's tactical analysis proved accurate as the lead fighter moved into position for an engine-disabling attack. His approach vector and weapon selection suggested professional military training adapted for contractor operations, precise enough to create mechanical failure without obvious evidence of hostile fire. "He's targeting our number 2 engine," she observed, watching the fighter's nose angle through her phone's zoom camera. "Elena, monitor engine parameters. The moment you see any anomalies, shut down fuel flow immediately." The intercom system carried Captain Morrison's carefully modulated voice throughout the passenger cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're continuing to experience air traffic control complications. Our flight crew is managing the situation professionally, and we expect to resolve these issues shortly." His calm understatement masked the reality that they were effectively in aerial combat with professional mercenaries who possessed overwhelming tactical advantages. Yet Venetia noticed something in Morrison's demeanor that suggested his brief Air Force experience included more than routine transport missions. "Captain, what aircraft did you fly during your military service?" she asked quietly. "KC-135 Stratotankers," he replied, maintaining focus on his instruments while executing subtle course corrections that kept their position unpredictable. Air-to-air refueling operations, mostly classified missions supporting fighter squadrons. Venetia's estimation of their chances improved significantly. Tanker pilots developed skills that transferred perfectly to defensive maneuvering, the ability to maintain stable flight characteristics, while other aircraft maneuvered aggressively nearby, sensitivity to air turbulence patterns that indicated approaching fighters, and most importantly, experience working with fighter pilots under combat conditions. "Then you understand what I'm about to ask you to do," she said. Through the cockpit windows, the hostile aircraft had formed up in classic attack formation, their pilots preparing for coordinated strikes that would disable the airliner without destroying it entirely. Professional work that spoke to extensive training and considerable experience with this type of operation. Elena's instruments began showing electronic interference patterns that suggested active radar painting. "They're targeting us with fire control systems. This is really happening." Venetia's encrypted communication system chimed with an update from Ghostwriter. "Reaper, friendly assets are 3 minutes out. Two F-22 Raptors vectoring to your position with authorization to engage hostile aircraft threatening civilian transportation. The news changed everything. F-22 Raptors represented the most advanced air superiority fighters in the world, capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously while remaining effectively invisible to enemy radar systems. More importantly, they were operated by pilots whose training made contractor mercenaries look like weekend hobbyists. "We just need to survive 3 more minutes," Venetia announced to Morrison and Alina. "But those are going to be the longest 3 minutes of our lives." The lead fighter began his attack run with professional precision, approaching from a vector that would minimize their ability to evade while maximizing his probability of achieving engine damage without catastrophic aircraft loss. Venetia watched his approach with the cold calculation of someone who'd spent years on both sides of such engagements. She could read his tactical thinking, anticipate his decisions, and most importantly, exploit his assumptions about civilian aircraft capabilities. "Captain, execute emergency climb. Maximum angle on my mark." Morrison's hands positioned over the controls with muscle memory that transcended his years of routine commercial operations. Alina secured instruments and prepared for G-forces that would test both aircraft and crew beyond normal tolerances. Through the window, Venetia could see the hostile pilot's face behind his visor, could almost read his surprise as his target began behaving in ways that violated every assumption about civilian aircraft defensive capabilities. "Mark," she said. The Boeing 787 climbed toward the sky like a missile. The massive airliner's emergency climb caught all 3 hostile fighters off guard, their pilots forced to abort carefully planned attack runs as their target disappeared above their engagement envelope. The Boeing 787's powerful engines, designed for efficient long-range cruise, delivered surprising performance when pushed beyond normal commercial operating parameters. "Climb rate 6,000 feet per minute," Alina reported, monitoring structural stress indicators that were approaching yellow caution ranges. "We're pushing beyond certified operational limits." Venetia maintained communication with approaching friendly assets while coordinating their defensive maneuvers. Her encrypted system displayed tactical information that would have been impossible for civilian aircraft to access under normal circumstances: radar signatures, approach vectors, and most importantly, the exact position of 2 F-22 Raptors that remained invisible to hostile sensors. "Ghost Rider, this is Reaper. Hostiles are regrouping below our position. Estimate 2 minutes before they adjust for our altitude advantage." The response came back with military precision. "Reaper, Raptor flight is 90 seconds out. Maintain current altitude and heading. Do not acknowledge any further radio communication from hostile aircraft." Captain Morrison fought to maintain control as the aircraft climbed beyond its optimal performance envelope, his experience with high-performance military aircraft providing crucial insight into how far they could push their civilian airliner before structural limitations became catastrophic failures. "Major, we can't maintain this climb rate much longer," he warned. "This airframe wasn't designed for combat maneuvering." "It doesn't need to be," Venetia replied, watching altitude readings that placed them significantly higher than their pursuers had anticipated. "We just need to buy 90 more seconds." Through the cockpit windows, she could see the 3 hostile fighters climbing hard to reestablish contact, their pilots burning through fuel reserves at unsustainable rates while trying to match the airliner's unexpected performance. Professional contractors operated under strict fuel management protocols. They couldn't afford to get stranded in international airspace without enough reserves to reach friendly territory. The passenger cabin had gone eerily quiet, 300 people instinctively sensing that something far beyond routine air traffic delays was unfolding around them. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm, but Venetia noticed their body language suggested emergency protocols were already in effect. Alina's radar screen began showing new contacts approaching from the northeast, fast-moving signatures that appeared briefly before disappearing again, indicating aircraft with advanced stealth capabilities maneuvering at high speed. "I've got intermittent contacts bearing 045, estimated speed Mach 2.2, she reported. "Whatever's coming is moving fast." Venetia allowed herself a tight smile. "That's the cavalry." The lead hostile fighter had managed to climb within missile range, his aircraft straining at maximum performance to match the airliner's altitude advantage. Through her phone's camera zoom, Venetia could see his weapons systems cycling through target acquisition sequences, suggesting he was preparing for a shot that would end their desperate evasion. 60 seconds, she murmured, watching the fighter pilot's aircraft approach optimal firing position. Morrison maintained maximum climb attitude despite warning indicators that suggested they were approaching the structural limits of civilian aircraft design. His military background provided crucial confidence in pushing beyond normal operating parameters, trusting that aircraft engineering included safety margins that could be exploited in life-threatening situations. "Ghost Rider hostile aircraft preparing weapons release," Venetia transmitted. "Request immediate intervention." The response came back with single-word efficiency: "Roger." High above the Pacific Ocean, two of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft prepared to announce their presence in ways that would remind professional contractors about the difference between mercenary work and military service. The hostile pilots never saw them coming. F-22 Raptors appeared out of nowhere with the supernatural grace of aircraft designed to be invisible until the moment they chose to announce their presence. The lead hostile fighter, focused intently on achieving weapons lock against the climbing airliner, received his first indication of company when his radar warning systems erupted in electronic chaos. "Singapore 447, this is Raptor Lead," came a voice over the radio with the calm authority of a pilot who'd never met an air-to-air engagement he couldn't win. "We have you under escort. Hostile aircraft. You are directed to immediately break off engagement and exit this airspace." The effect on the three contractor fighters was immediate and dramatic. Professional mercenaries understood the tactical situation they now faced. Their modified F-16s, impressive against civilian targets, were completely outclassed by stealth fighters flown by pilots whose training made contractor mercenaries look like student pilots. Venetia watched through the cockpit windows as the lead hostile aircraft abruptly abandoned his attack run, pulling into a defensive spiral that suggested his pilot was very familiar with F-22 capabilities and wanted no part of what came next. "Raptor Lead, this is Major Victoria Blackwood aboard Singapore 447, she transmitted on the emergency frequency, requesting tactical assessment of hostile intent. The response carried a hint of recognition that spoke to military aviation's tight-knit community. "Major Blackwood, good to hear your voice. We have 3 unknown aircraft with no filed flight plans operating in violation of international airspace protocols. They've demonstrated hostile intent towards civilian transportation." Through her encrypted communications, Ghost Rider provided additional tactical information. "Reaper, satellite surveillance confirms hostile aircraft are withdrawing toward international boundary limits. Estimate they'll be out of engagement range within 5 minutes." Captain Morrison began bringing the aircraft back to normal cruise altitude, the relief visible in his posture as warning indicators returned to acceptable ranges. Alina monitored their systems with professional efficiency, ensuring that their extreme maneuvering hadn't compromised any critical aircraft functions. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison," came the announcement over the passenger address system. "We've resolved our air traffic control complications and are returning to normal flight operations. We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience and appreciate your patience during these unusual circumstances. The understatement of the year, Venetia thought, but appropriate for maintaining passenger confidence while they completed their flight to Tokyo. Raptor lead, thank you for the assistance, she transmitted. Request escort to Japanese airspace to ensure no further complications. Roger that, Major. We'll maintain overwatch until you're safely on approach to Narita. And Major, it's good to see Reaper back in the sky. Through the cockpit windows, she caught glimpses of the F-22s maintaining formation positions that kept them invisible to civilian passengers while providing maximum tactical coverage. Professional work by pilots who understood that protecting civilian aircraft was both duty and honor. The hostile contractors had disappeared toward the horizon, their mission abandoned in the face of superior air power and tactical disadvantage. Whatever they'd sought from the diplomatic cargo or from Venetia herself would remain beyond their reach. But as she settled back into the jump seat, Venetia realized that her